Morning. How are you doing, Catherine?
Good. Looking forward to this episode.
Excellent. So, what? As I lose track, what episode are we on? What episode is this here?
4, 6, 8. This is episode 9.
All right, we're in episode 9, and what are we going to be talking about today? There's been some little meme teasers out there.
Yes. What do we think might have happened if Qui-Gon had never died and got to remain Anakin's mentor? Would the Force have intervened? Would he have let him go back to save his mom and liberate this? What would have happened?
Well, and here's my other, this is kind of an homage to the Marvel What If. Here's my other, what if Anakin's dark side leanings had turned Qui-Gon, who was, notoriously neutral? What if it had turned Qui-Gon more dark?
Right, because he was already, Qui-Gon, as mentioned by Count Dooku, was his apprentice, so you think that there's probably a little bit of that in him, maybe. That's honestly a story I really would love to see told. If they could, sadly Christopher Lee isn't with us anymore, but that would be a great story to film as like a one-off or a mini-series, to see how that relationship went.
Yeah, or at least give us a novel. Give us, something. Is like Dooku Jedi Lost that was amazing. So give us that, but for Qui-Gon, or a what if.
I really wish that Dooku Jedi Lost was also adapted as a novel, because that would have been easily one of the best. It's a great radio drama, though.
Absolutely, I loved it with the cast. Anyway, so let's get up with the premise. All right, so in episode 1, for those that are just casual things, is there's many what ifs and little variants that could have made this not happen. It's like, what happened exactly to the Naboo starfighter that they had to even land on Tatooine? Is oh, the ship doesn't break down, we don't land on Tatooine, we take Amidala straight to Coruscant, but we're done, end of story, credits by George Lucas, move on.
Yeah, because the fans of the show who've been watching the show for a while and seen me in the virtual cantina know that my greater opinion of the Skywalker saga as a whole is that it's ultimately about the demise of the Sith and the evolution of the Jedi to be better than they were. That the Force was deliberately making certain types of choices to nudge things in a certain direction, and so it seems almost like a flurry of coincidences that needed to happen, like the Jedi needed to succeed in rescuing the Queen from Naboo. The ship just needed to be damaged in just the right way so it didn't get blown out of the sky. They needed to be able to land safely away from the Hutts, and just happened to go into that water shop, to meet Anakin, who just happened to take an interest in them, which is another thing, because Qui-Gon didn't pick up on anything about Anakin when he was first in the shop. And I don't even think he addressed him when he first walked in there. It was just Anakin and Padme, but she was kind of fine, brushing him off when they left. And I'm thinking, how much would things have really gone sideways or another way if maybe they didn't end up there, Or like the pod race, Anakin has several close calls towards the end of that. Like, even when he finally beats Sebulba, it's like, okay, you got this tiny little pod racer engine attached to Sebulba's massive engine, and just because you hit the boosters, it magically breaks free. You don't get caught up in that, whereas his does. I thought, I wonder if the Force is doing something here, because it needs this, Anakin to go with him.
Well, and I think that that's really alluded to in that is I think that you're hitting it right on the head. Is they allude to Anakin is the only human that can pod race. Is he's using the Force without knowing it, his heightened reflexes and senses. So who's to say he's not using the Force to push away from Sebulba's pod racer? He's not doing that just completely unconscious. We don't know what happens to untrained Jedi at that age, because most of them have been trained. We have no idea what they can or cannot do.
Right, and then because they keep hitting on the idea that Anakin, oh, he's got a higher M count than any of the other Jedi, but that really doesn't amount. It doesn't. At first, I thought it didn't really amount to much other than like a signal to just so they can identify him. It's more so that the Jedi characters who put stock in the idea that Anakin is a chosen one, which allows things to go the way they do. But thinking back on it, the fact that he is the only human who could pod race, but certainly not the only human with the Force, suggests that maybe that M count contributed to something. The thing which I really was finding fascinating about the subject is the fact that Yoda strictly forbid Qui-Gon taking on another apprentice. And when Qui-Gon flippantly says, "No, Obi-Wan's ready for the trials," and Yoda's like, "Oh, not so fast. That's up to us, not up to you." So it does make me wonder how that would have played, because certainly Qui-Gon would have done what he needed to, and I wonder if he would have gone so far as to actually leave the Jedi Order to be able to do it.
And that's what's getting to in my first point is whether or not Qui-Gon's mind seems pretty made up, that this is what I believe, this is the prophecy, this is the chosen one. I'm going to do what I have to do to train him. Had he lived, would he just completely have left the Jedi Order? Would we, would Anakin and Qui-Gon started this entire new order of gray Jedi that would be out there in the universe at odds with both the Sith and the Jedi? So
yes. Hey, Gio.
Good morning, Gio.
So we were just talking about what we thought the likelihood of what would have happened if Qui-Gon had, say, decided to teach Anakin, or maybe if he never found Anakin. We think the Force would have intervened to make them meet at some point. And seeing as Yoda seemed to be dead set against Qui-Gon taking on another apprentice and would not allow Qui-Gon to just brush off Obi-Wan for the trials, then do we think Qui-Gon would have gone so far as to leave the Jedi Order to train Anakin, or where that would have gone?
Okay, so I think that if Anakin and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan had not met on Tatooine during the Phantom Menace, I think they would have met later. I think the universe would have willed it together, the Force. And then to the second point, I think, yes, Qui-Gon Jinn was ready to either reform the Jedi Order, but I have a feeling he declined a position on the Jedi Council, I believe, originally in the EU expanded universe. I don't know if that's confirmed. I have yet to read Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray, which I believe would have the answer to that in canon. But I think Qui-Gon Jinn was a revolutionary and was very progressive and liberal, and so would have wanted to reform the Jedi Order for the better, or seek to create a new order, but without the kind of institution and corruption of the Jedi Order and the Old Republic, and would have had Obi-Wan with him as a brother, and Anakin as maybe their first example of a balanced Jedi. I don't want to use the term gray Jedi, but yes, somebody who's a bit like the Bendu from Rebels, in the middle, and abstains from partisan light side, dark side, just the Force. There's one Force in everything and everyone. And the Qui-Gon Jinn talked about the living Force guiding him. And that's the part that Yoda mentioned in The Empire Strikes Back, is within everything and life makes it grow. And then there's the cosmic Force, which is kind of the almost divine will of the way things happen. And together they're known as the Unifying Force. I think Qui-Gon Jinn would have created a new philosophy, maybe not a strict set of rules like a code, but something that balances what's perceived to be good and evil. And Anakin would have been the champion of this. And I don't think he would have been succumbing to any dark impulses if Qui-Gon Jinn had been his master and if Darth Maul hadn't slain him.
Yeah, and I think you've hit on yet another one of these what ifs right there. Is yeah, okay, they met later on in life. They met here. It's Qui-Gon and Anakin together. He's his Padawan. Well, if that had happened and the council hadn't forbid training and he lived, he could have taken over leadership, or at least a good chance of leadership on the council, and changed the Jedi Order from within. You know, is reform it. And if the Jedi Order hadn't been so dead set against it, they would have recognized Palpatine as a Sith earlier. Qui-Gon and Mace could have been with Anakin when they confront the Emperor, and that whole scene goes down completely different.
And one more thing, I reckon Qui-Gon Jinn would have been able to bring Count Dooku back from the precipice of falling to the dark side, and maybe Count Dooku, depending on chronology, might have found out about Palpatine. And so then,
well, Dooku knew about Palpatine, and when he's got Obi-Wan in the little Force. So if that had been Qui-Gon as opposed to Obi-Wan there in that scene, would he have converted his old master back or gotten more information from him and learned about Palpatine at that point?
I think yes. And then also, if we go back 10 years to just following the Phantom Menace, if Qui-Gon Jinn had survived, but say Darth Maul was still alive, imagine Darth Maul got away and all of Rebels, all of the Clone Wars and Rebels events still happened. Qui-Gon Jinn survives. Obi-Wan is his apprentice / fellow master in training the Chosen One, potentially the Chosen One. And then they discover, because Qui-Gon Jinn never cuts anyone out from his life, even if they supposedly leave the Jedi Order like Count Dooku did, Count Dooku doesn't become Darth Tyrannus and apprentices himself to Darth Sidious. Rather, he sees an opportunity to reform the entire Republic with Qui-Gon Jinn at his side, as he did allude to when he imprisoned Obi-Wan on Geonosis in Attack of the Clones. Remember, he pauses after kind of tempting Obi-Wan, saying, "Join me, and together we can destroy the Sith." When Qui-Gon Jinn's mentioned, he pauses, and Christopher Lee acts it really well by kind of looking into the middle distance and folding his arms and saying, "I wish he were here right now. I could do with his assistance." And it looks like Count Dooku is contemplating still whether to even go ahead with Palpatine's grand plan, because I don't think he wanted to do that.
Well, yeah, because it seems like the only reason, Dooku had his own plan for dealing with the Jedi. He's like, okay, they're too far gone. I can't deal with this anymore. So he goes to claim his inheritance. He starts the Separatist movement, which was already getting moving after Episode 1, given the events in that film. And so he eventually meets Palpatine at some point and realizes, your plan to deal with the Jedi is a lot more efficient than mine. So he gets brainwashed a little bit, agrees to help him. But of course, like all Sith do, is going to get rid of Palpatine at some point. And I don't think Dooku would have gone so far as to establish a Sith Empire or anything. So he was just trying to set things right again and just kind of went down that path, which is why I think he's being honest when he says that he does wish Qui-Gon was still there. He wants Qui-Gon's guidance. And even though he took the name of Sith, I think he's viewing himself more like a sleeper agent. I might do some evil things, and I'm not going to lean into that philosophy at all, because I'm going to kill Palpatine and things will be fine when this is all over with. But going back to the original point, it's like, I wonder that if Qui-Gon did live, since at the time of Episode 1, Dooku had already left the Order. So I wonder if he would have, if maybe Qui-Gon would have wanted to introduce Anakin to Dooku and say, hey, you left because you were fed up with the way the Jedi are going. I believe this Chosen One is the key to everything. And maybe that would have helped woo him back to the light a bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think that Count Dooku would have always sought to return to the Republic as a whole, even if whether he was a founding member of the Separatist Confederacy or not. He saw an opportunity as an astute political leader. He jumped on the bandwagon and helped it gain more momentum. He saw the Trade Federation issues. I think even though he might have looked at like a very aristocratic, capitalist, elitist very wealthy person born into old galaxy money, not just old world money as we have here, he doesn't look as if he was dismissive of people below his station. And I think with Qui-Gon Jinn, they would have been a really good balancing act politically, potentially. I could imagine Count Dooku in an alternative timeline running against Palpatine to be Supreme Chancellor, because he would have rallied enough star systems for his support, and then he could have stayed within the system of the Republic, and Qui-Gon Jinn stayed within the system of the Jedi Order, and both revolutionized simultaneously and peacefully. And I think they're both charismatic enough to not even need to use the Force to persuade people to consider their opinions and their perceptions and their points of view. And we would have had a very different looking galaxy where Count Dooku was not radicalized by someone even more Machiavellian than him in Palpatine. Qui-Gon Jinn maybe would have survived a duel with Darth Maul. Obi-Wan would have not been as desperate to fulfill his promise to his master, because his master was still alive, and together the two of them could handle Anakin, good and evil. And then you would have had Ahsoka maybe guided by Qui-Gon Jinn, who I always thought there's a kind of lineage of progressive Jedi who are far more than just a Jedi Knight or Master. Ahsoka's definitely one. Qui-Gon Jinn, I think, is the main in the saga films,
Right.
and Ahsoka's the main out of the expanded universe of Disney canon as well as EU stuff. And I think maybe that's represented by people who use the green lightsaber, because it's not the classic blue as the Sith have the classic red, but it seems to be, green. When I saw Luke first ignite his green lightsaber and Return of the Jedi at the pit of Carkoon, I thought, this is awesome. And I also thought it was very planetary, very in touch with nature. And I think that's what's, to me, it represents spiritually and visually. It's the green of nature as we know it. It's kind of ecological, and it shows that you're one component of nature, and you're not, as a human in the galaxy or in whatever universe you reside, you're not detached from nature or superior to it. You're accepting and surrendering to the will of everything, which is nature, I guess, and is the Force. And so the green lightsaber to me represents not only balance, even though green's not blue and red mixed, that's purple with Mace Windu, which is quite an obvious visual metaphor, but it's a connection to something greater than yourself, but also a peacefulness and an acceptance of something greater. And that's why I think green was the perfect color for Luke. And I'm so glad that George Lucas, I think, was quite a near the end of production decision to make it green in the final film, because the original
I think that we can say that wasn't due to practical, blue screen, green screen. It's all against the blue sky effects. But yes,
yeah.
Well, I like the idea that it's green also, because Yoda was sort of one of the mentor he had for a much longer time, and Yoda was much more connected with nature.
yes.
But I would say that if the Clone Wars didn't happen, because say Qui-Gon didn't die, Anakin was with him, and they're moving back, then Ahsoka would not have happened either, because the whole reason she was paired with Anakin in the first place was because the Clone Wars were starting, and they needed, you had a shortage of Jedi, and they needed that to happen. So she wouldn't really be in the picture. But another thing that would have happened is I think Qui-Gon would not have been opposed to Anakin going back to try and free the slaves, because Qui-Gon could tell that Anakin had a very strong bond with his mother, and he didn't mind it at all, which of course is a huge no-no in the Jedi Order. Yeah. So it begs the question, how long would Qui-Gon have waited till he either encouraged him to go back or would have allowed him, and what path that would have sent Anakin down, because Anakin, like when he tells, or rather when Luke rather tells the Emperor at the end of Return of the Jedi that, I am a Jedi like my father before me, he's specifically referring to the fact that he wants to be a Jedi like his father, who wanted to save people and help people and not, be, just super, advocating violence or the political figures like the old Jedi were. So he's like so proudly defining that. And so it begs the question, if Anakin had gone down that path, what would have corrupted him at that point? Because it seems like the Force would try and nudge things back in the direction. Because if the Clone Wars don't really happen in that way, if Dooku's kind of won back to the light and Anakin's able to go free his mother, then it's like now the Force is going to pull some more strings.
Right, because the major thing that turned Anakin to the dark side is attachments. his attachment to his
Yes.
mother, his attachment to Padme. And if he was trained by a Jedi or converted Jedi or that didn't mind, that allowed those attachments, what changes?
Right, and also when Qui-Gon died, Palpatine stepped in and filled in that fatherly type role, which is why he starts leaning on him a lot. And it's not a coincidence, I don't think, that halfway through episode 2, which of course is literally halfway through the whole prequel trilogy, that's where Anakin makes the decision that every choice he's going to make through the rest of the series is based on his desire to not lose anything. Like the rest of episode 2 and 3, he's just completely motivated by like, oh, I gotta save Padme, even if it means Dooku gets away and this war takes off. Oh, I've got to turn against the Jedi because Palpatine says there's a conspiracy and it'll help Padme, and and it just kind of snowballs. And of course, the Clone Wars TV series does a great job of fleshing that out a lot more, so you understand it more. So it is kind of fascinating because it's like, on the one hand, Qui-Gon being murdered is what really enforces Obi-Wan to want to honor that word. Like if Qui-Gon say had died of like a heart attack or if his ship suddenly exploded, I don't think Obi-Wan would be as into, but because the enemy of the ultimate enemy of the Jedi, the Sith, murdered Qui-Gon, then yes, you have to train this next Jedi.
Yeah.
Because of course Obi-Wan did not respect Anakin at all. He referred to him as another pathetic life form.
Right. Skip is watching, and Skip comments that great Jedi would have been cool. And I think a little bit of what we'd been talking about earlier is maybe Ahsoka would not have happened if Qui-Gon had lived. But I think it's ironic that down the lineage is what Ahsoka's become in the Mandalorian show is a lot of what we see of Qui-Gon. He is, I am no Jedi. I just, live with the Force and that. So I think that's ironic that she's kind of done that. Now, let me ask this question did Qui-Gon misinterpret the prophecy? We're talking about so many of these little bitty factors that have changed, that could have changed and could have changed the entire universe with the death of Qui-Gon. Was Qui-Gon the chosen one?
Right, because it's like, I don't think if Qui-Gon knew the specifics of how the prophecy would be fulfilled, that he would have totally encouraged it. I don't think he would be on board with the slaughter of the Jedi Order and, oh, we're going to have to let the Sith Empire reign for 23 years and then the contingency kicks in to take them down.
Against that.
Right, because that's kind of what it is. It's like the Force is intervening to take down the corrupt Jedi Order. The consequence of that is you have to deal with the Sith Empire, but the Chosen One's children are the ones who get to be instrumental in taking them down. So I don't think if Qui-Gon could see all those specific points that he would have necessarily encouraged it, but I don't think he totally would have abandoned Anakin either. I think he would have tried to almost willfully say, no, I'm going to change this. Kind of like Anakin when when Yoda tells him, oh, don't be upset for people who die and become one of the Force. Rejoice and be happy. And Anakin's like, no, I'm changing fate. Steps you take to avoid your fate leads you straight to it. So maybe Qui-Gon could have, if Qui-Gon had enough foresight to see what was going to happen and tries to avoid it anyway, it would probably come to pass anyhow.
Yeah, it's the self-fulfilling prophecy that we did at the beginning.
And
serpent eating its own tail.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how that would have happened.
I would like, I want to see, and I hope we do see, is some more long-term overarching impacts that Qui-Gon may have had in the backstory of how Obi-Wan becomes different after the events have happened with Anakin, and how Obi-Wan changes to be a different mentor to Luke than he was to Anakin. Will we see in the Kenobi series Obi-Wan communing with Qui-Gon through the Force, and that Qui-Gon still influencing him beyond the grave?
I hope so. It would make sense because even Yoda, counseled Obi-Wan about that at the end of Revenge of the Sith. That I'm going to teach you how to commune with your master.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things I wish we got to see in Clone Wars that we never did was, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka must have gone back to the Jedi Council and told them about their Mortis experience. And that also makes me think about fate, because now that they were shown all these things, it's like and yet they still keep walking the line that they were walking before, which allows things to come to pass in the way they needed to. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, but it's fascinating because you have all these little tiny things. If one thing goes wrong and the whole thing kind of, because even Anakin needs to marry Padme and have kids with her because obviously Leia and Luke inherited Padme's best qualities, which is to be credited for taking down the Empire.
Yeah. Do you think
that brings? Go ahead, Gio.
Do you think? Sorry. Do you? I think I lost what I was going to say.
Oh,
It was about
sorry.
something Catherine mentioned in the middle. No. I'll come back to it. Don't worry.
Okay, well, see, that brings me to what we were talking about when we were talking about Mortis and the world between worlds. Is it actually a physical place? Does it happen? Is it within the Force, within your mind? So it doesn't necessarily bring back the possibility of real time travel and real multiverse within the Star Wars universe. It doesn't do that, but it can change the character and what is going on in their mind. They have to keep going down that road, but maybe they can start to influence where that road is going from that knowledge gained there.
Right, because when Qui-Gon spoke with Obi-Wan and Mortis, he kind of tells him to just stay on the path. You know, he's the chosen one, keep believing in it type of thing. And then it also, like you said, makes you wonder, since this Mortis doesn't, certainly it's not a physical place and it could be in your head or whatever, it's like, okay, the father wasn't the one giving Obi-Wan that message because the father was not advocating for messing with these intruders at all. So it's like, did Qui-Gon really tell him that? Does he, now that he's one with the Force, does he have the gift of even greater foresight to see what's actually going to happen? Because, I mean, it seems that if the son was able to show Anakin the future of all the horrible things he's going to do, then the Qui-Gon spirit there should be able to know all the horrible things he's going to do.
In my opinion, I think he does know. To me, that wasn't Obi-Wan's consciousness creating a dream or hallucination of Qui-Gon. To me, that was, I know it's deliberately ambiguous, and Dave Filoni has a book with the specific answers to everything, but I reckon in that book it does say Qui-Gon Jinn is a Force apparition or spirit or ghost. Maybe not in the way that we see later, but that is actually Qui-Gon's soul, spirit, essence reaching out through the Force to Obi-Wan to connect him back to the righteous path of being kind of progressive, learned master who accepts Anakin for his flawed human aspects as well as his incredible positive abilities. And so if we don't see, we have to see narratively and logically speaking, some Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi interactions in the miniseries, because if not, then I think it's just an oversight and someone will write a comic or a novel to fill it in. I haven't actually read, is it Jackson Miller's novel called Kenobi?
I just finished that. So
oh, okay.
Do it.
Oh, do it. Okay. I will do it. I will just do it. So in that, I guess it came out years ago. I don't mind if you spoil anything for me. Catherine, have you read the novel?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Do you hear from Qui-Gon?
So in the novel, spoiler alert, is Obi-Wan or adjusting to being Ben does a lot of exposition in what is going on and his feelings going on in trying to talk to Qui-Gon, but Qui-Gon doesn't talk back. But this is just in the very, very earliest parts of his, journey and his time on Tatooine. It doesn't take place over the years and years he was there. So it leaves a lot of room open for his trying to commune with Qui-Gon. And sometimes I think maybe in his trying to talk to him, in one case, it specifically, him talking to him does influence events that actually happens. So completely leaves it open to the realm of possibility that may happen.
That's really good to know. And to me, that's if I was the author of that novel, if it was set immediately after Revenge of the Sith, I would do the same, and I'd leave breadcrumbs for a future work to continue, and to Qui-Gon to then you almost earn the reappearance of Qui-Gon Jinn narratively, because you've had morsels of it with Obi-Wan trying, and there's always I I think, greater satisfaction in stories when somebody has tried and failed, but doesn't give up. And then eventually they reap the fruits of their labor, and it tastes much sweeter because they've gone through adversity and probably learned a few moral lessons.
Well, and that's
and
exactly what is happening in Kenobi. Is Skip is commenting how it is an excellent read, and it plays out the beginning of Obi-Wan's Tatooine journey. Is what happens, and different things that happen to him that are going to influence what he does, and how he becomes changed. His journey from Obi-Wan to Ben, and how he ultimately affects Luke's training.
Right, and Ben obviously is much more of a defeatist in a way, because when Luke doesn't really want to go, he doesn't really try and encourage him to. He just kind of, okay. Or like in Return of the Jedi, when Luke says, I can't kill my father. Oh, I guess the Emperor's won already. You know, he's not really pushing it as far, almost like he's a bit dejected from all of his time there. Because Qui-Gon, as we saw from even all the way up until the end, was absolutely confident that this is the path, this is the way. And then even the vision of Qui-Gon and Mortis continued to say, no, this is where we're going, this is the way. And Yoda even becoming a lot more cautious, as we saw in Dagobah, because once he saw that Luke was similar to Anakin, he's like, oh, no, we're done with this. But
he's got that t-shirt already.
Well, right, and Obi-Wan's voice tries to, and it's Obi-Wan's voice who tries to convince Yoda to keep going. But as we learn in episode 6, the real reason that Obi-Wan did not tell Luke that Vader was his father is because, you know, he wanted them to kill him, and that would not have worked. He tries to say, oh, from a certain point of view, it's like, no, you weren't going to tell him.
You wanted him to kill him, not redeem him.
Right. It's like, whereas Qui-Gon seemed to have firmly believed in the goodness of the Chosen One and the benefit from the beginning.
Yeah.
And never really changing his mind.
So we've talked a lot about what would happen to Anakin if Qui-Gon had lived, and we're starting to allude to it. Would Obi-Wan have been the great Jedi that he was? What would have happened to Obi-Wan? You know, obviously, a large part of the arc that defines him is his battle back and forth through Rebels and the Clone Wars.
Right.
Arc with Maul. He doesn't have that if Qui-Gon lives.
Right, and he also, because this whole nature of his relationship with Anakin wasn't so much of a mentor, more like a brother, which is another reason that turns out, the relationship turns out the way it does. So it's like, if the Clone Wars doesn't happen, or the wars probably happen in some fashion, because Dooku would still be committed to wanting to change things. But you're right, if Maul isn't there, if the Clone Wars aren't as big of an issue as it would have been otherwise, then Obi-Wan probably doesn't even meet Satine again to start getting that ball rolling. So he would still be a decent Jedi, but would he be the famous General Kenobi that Leia addressed him as in her distress message? I don't think so. Probably not.
Is they would, help me, Qui-Gon, you're my only hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, it still has the same number of syllables. Yeah, I think that Obi-Wan still would have been a prolific Jedi, but maybe have less of an influence over the flow of events directly, but not necessarily less of an influence indirectly, because I think he would have been a partnership tutor with Qui-Gon Jinn to Anakin, because Qui-Gon Jinn never seemed to treat Obi-Wan like a son, even though traditionally the age gap between an apprentice and their master seems to almost be a parental generational gap for most people, or for most human Jedi at least. So I think that Qui-Gon Jinn was not paternalistic to Obi-Wan. He was more fraternalistic. I just invented that word. But I think that Obi-Wan never struck the balance that he ideally wished he had because of how rushed things were, and then the emergency situation of the Clone Wars and the galaxy. Because to me, I think Qui-Gon Jinn always knew that Anakin immediately had fallen in love with Padme, and Anakin, due to his personality and how he sensed things through the Force, would be resolute and rebellious, but ruggedly determined and tenacious to follow his heart's desire. So to become the best starfighter pilot in the galaxy, he won the pod race, which is what he wanted to do. He was accepted to be an apprentice Jedi, which is what he dreamed of and what he wanted. He would have returned to free his mother and bring her off Tatooine with him. And he would have married Padme. Oh, and he would have freed the slaves. So he would have been rather than a crusader, he would have been a savior and a liberator as a young Jedi Knight before even kind of graduating through the trials.
Now, see, there is where the Force intervenes and turned him evil, because he becomes the savior and he becomes the chancellor and he becomes the, somehow Anakin has returned. But the possibility is there.
Yeah.
Well, another thing you saw is that Qui-Gon really gave Obi-Wan the cold shoulder after he wasn't really interested in Anakin in the first one. He's like, okay, yeah, I'm done with you. I'm more interested in, Anakin now. So it's like, that would be another interesting dynamic to see how that would go. Because if Yoda had said, okay, Obi-Wan can face the trials, and Qui-Gon decides to leave the Order anyway to raise Anakin, Obi-Wan would still have that relationship with Qui-Gon, would be interested in it. And I wonder how that might change him to see that, Qui-Gon is going off on this pilgrimage, so to speak, with Anakin and Dooku. And yet he's kind of stuck as the reject, if that would potentially send him down. Because we saw the amount of rage that Obi-Wan had when he killed Darth Maul, or on the so we know he's got that inner darkness in him a little bit too, but it very rarely rears its head.
Right. And they could have worked out to where, Obi-Wan and Anakin still had the relationship of brothers that they had as master and apprentice, but with the father figure to kind of, or the older brother, if Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were really more like that relationship, that to temper it for both of them.
Do you think that I remembered what I was going to say before. At the end of the Mortis arc, the 3 chapters of the Clone Wars, I didn't manage to finish watching the 3 in the rewatch, and I've only seen them the once. So when it came out in 2011, I think the Mortis arc is now 10 years old, which is shocking to me. But anyway, at the end of the Mortis arc, do Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka explicitly recall the events they just experienced as they leave?
Well, when they get out, Rex talks to him, says, "You're back," and they're like, "Well, we were gone for like days," and he didn't seem to notice. And they kind of looked at each other, and given that they realize Rex has that they obviously went through some type of time vortex or whatever, they decide that you could tell that they decide it's best not to tell them about it. Okay. It's like, oh yeah, we're back. Okay, yeah, we just went off the radar for a second. It's almost like they're going to keep it their little secret, but surprisingly, it never really came up again. At least not between those 3 characters of Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka. And the 4th character I forgot to mention in this whole thing would be Sifo-Dyas, because he has the gift of clairvoyance. He was tight with Qui-Gon and Dooku. So it's like, if those events also go astray, would he be able to see and be able to clue them in and say, hey, this is what's going to happen? And how that would be a really cool thing to try and factor in as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think Sifo-Dyas' mystery would have been less mysterious, because I think Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan together would have found out, and Count Dooku would have helped. That's my perception. If we had a what-if alternative reality where Qui-Gon Jinn survived, the Clone Wars might still have occurred, but through other means than the way they transpired. So not, and also not as obfuscated by Palpatine in the way that we saw, but maybe he would have constructed another proxy war, distraction, false emergency situation where he's pulling all the strings, and he still could have fooled Count Dooku, Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and the mainstream Jedi and the wider Republic. But the manner in which I think Palpatine would have had to clear the chessboard and then replace the pieces in a different order to continue his grand plan, because and also find an apprentice, or maybe if Darth Maul had survived, continue training Darth Maul, and then maybe bring along people like Savage and Asajj Ventress and other acolytes of the dark side. The Night Sisters maybe would have been part of his army with Mother Talzin, because he wouldn't have been able to take on, I think, Dooku, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan with the Chosen One on their side.
added a new layer to the original trilogy if, you know, that continues and one of his apprentices is Kira and Han has to deal with that.
Oh wow, yeah. And then what if Mara Jade emerges as a dissenting Imperial rogue agent who's made to track Obi-Wan because, made to track one of somebody, Luke or Han, communicates with Boba Fett, who has a larger and more vocal role. Give Jeremy Bullock more lines. And then maybe have Tamara Morrison also do the same lines, and then just alternate it and see if the fans notice.
Yeah, is so many options and potentials and what ifs. So would we want to see okay, Disney, are you listening? Disney, no, you're not, but would we
have spies in the group, remember?
Oh yes. Would we want to see a Star Wars animated what if like we're getting for Marvel right now?
One that's probably more related to the events of the films, perhaps, because the Marvel what if is definitely, it is very reminiscent of those old what if comics where you end up with like disaster at the end of each episode type of thing. But like a great what if would be, you know, what if Rey never found BB-8? You know, it's like if she doesn't find him, one could maybe argue that the Force would have willed it so that Finn would find her anyway, and maybe they would go off on that adventure. But, or better yet, what if BB-8 got destroyed with the map in the opening, you know, attack on the village? Well, then it's like now the Force has to pull some extra strings to make sure this, you know, make sure things happen the way they do, because they need the next best person in a way to carry on the, you know, to go inherit the Jedi legacy.
Yeah, and to extend that actually, because The Force Awakens is very similar to a film that came out in 1977, narratively and structurally. If the droids, R2 and 3PO's escape pod ejection had failed and they stayed on the Tantive 4 blockade runner, and so the plans never went to Obi-Wan and Luke never saw Leia, and Obi-Wan never received the message, what would have happened? Because it's a similar alternative outcome to a BB-8 never running into Rey, R2 never encountering Luke.
I think Obi-Wan was expecting Leia to show up, because you see the look on his face when she says, you know, my ship has fallen under attack, my mission to bring you Alderaan's field. He knows what she's talking about, so he was expecting her to show up. So I would imagine he would try and, granted, he still doesn't have the plan, so I guess his backup plan would be, okay, we need to infiltrate the Death Star and find a backup schematic ourselves.
Yeah. And he still would have spoken to a Wookiee smuggler in Mos Eisley to try and get swift transportation off Tatooine and back to Alderaan. Also, in Rogue One, that line where, and you hear the John Williams leitmotif play when Bail is about to run out of the room and he turns back and says that he has somebody to tell the news, and is it Jin? Somebody says, "Oh, do you trust them?" And Bale says, "I trust her with my life," and they play the little jingle. That was really good, because then that backs up what you're saying, Catherine, because Bale must have communicated with Leia and let Obi-Wan know, because obviously Obi-Wan and Bale are the reason why the Rebel Alliance endures. So it connects well.
And another key component in Luke even going with Obi-Wan was the fact that the stormtroopers killed his aunt and uncle. Whereas if that hadn't happened, he would have gotten like a, grounded into infinity by Uncle Owen. Then you probably would have seen Obi-Wan go to the farm, and then there'd be like a verbal smackdown, so to speak, between Obi-Wan and Uncle Owen, like we've seen in the comics. Because something I really like about the new Star Wars comics. They are going into the nature of that relationship and how Uncle Owen is like totally done with this. And he's like, no, and he almost resents the fact that Obi-Wan sort of helps them a couple times and saves them, because he just doesn't want to. It's like, I don't want to be any kind of debt of yours. It's like I agreed to take this kid, to raise him almost like my own son, not because I'm just babysitting him until you come back and take him to join your little club.
And spoiler alert, some of that, the first little hints of that are addressed in Kenobi. is that sort of the relationship and how he feels about Ben watching over them. So Ben has to be really cautious in how he watches over them.
Yeah. And that's not to say that every little decision, had it gone differently, would completely change everything. For example, if C-3PO had stayed at the Mars homestead in episode 2, since it's not clear why, there's deleted scenes that never made it to the Blu-ray about why they let Anakin and Padme take 3PO with them. But if 3PO doesn't go off on that adventure, it ultimately doesn't make a difference because, he gets his memory wiped anyway, and it's by chance that he shows up back on Tatooine anyhow. And yeah, he maybe has a few random adventures in Clone Wars, but nothing major and crucial. And yeah, he pilots the ship off of Mustafar, but Obi-Wan could have done that if he needed to if 3PO wasn't there. So it's like some things you could change, and it still kind of unfolds the way it needs to. But because I assume that because as we learned in the comics, R2, it's not that R5 randomly blew a fuse. R2 told him what mission he was on and how important it was. So R5 deliberately did that so that they'd be forced to take R2 anyway, meaning that if 3PO had never gone on all those adventures with R2, it wouldn't have mattered whether he told Luke or not, like, oh, you should buy that one, because R5 already is ready to sacrifice himself to ensure that R2 is going to join them anyway.
Well, and I think it's a lot of what we've been discussing is, yes, there's a lot of what ifs, but with every what if that we have, the Force finds a way to move it down that path. There's the Force is, to put it in Marvel new canon, what it is the Force has its own, timekeepers going on to keep the sacred timeline moving forward. The Force is going to do what it has to do for the events that are supposed to occur. Yes, maybe Qui-Gon lived, or maybe Qui-Gon didn't come to Tatooine at all, but this human that can pod race and starts doing it, because Watto would have started putting him on pod races on other
planets,
bigger planets and bigger things. This comes to the attention of the Jedi, and we got to go see, and by that point Anakin's a teenager and really already in the attitude and down the dark side. And
yeah, I'm pretty sure if he had stayed there on Tatooine, his happy-go-lucky attitude of being a slave would not have lasted, especially if he got to continue pod racing as much as he loves it. And he get a bit of that ego from there and be like, yeah, I'm kind of done with you, Watto.
Right. And he discovers his latent Force abilities is like Watto's, getting down on him, just Force chokes Watto.
And he could use the Force to sabotage the little bomb that's inside him and his mom and the other slaves, like telekinetically just sabotage all the bombs and all the slaves so we can bye-bye,
Right.
Which is a neat thing I would love to see as well. But it's just so cool to think about all these tiny little things. If they go a little bit differently, yeah. Because Anakin also needs to perform that selfless act to catch Padme's eye. So that way when he comes back a decade later, she's actually interested in him as much as she doesn't feel comfortable about it, which admittedly, didn't narratively handle very well, but get the idea.
Do you think that if there was an alternative version of Attack of the Clones, so everything that we're saying kind of indicates that the Clone Wars wouldn't have gone down the way they did, how different do you think George Lucas would have made the middle of the prequel trilogy? Because what would have been the main conflict he's building towards, if not the Clone Wars? Would it be merely the focus on dramatic tension between who's going to father Anakin better, Obi-Wan or Palpatine?
I think one of the main conflict in that case would have been that Anakin would have, after losing his mother, would have definitely committed to the path of, I can't ignore that. I need to go back to do what I pledged to do to begin with when I joined this, this club. And because if the Clone Wars don't happen, Anakin's not busy being caught up in all of that. And so he's going to go on his own crusade to deal with this. That's going to start a big movement. Then you're going to have much bigger conversations in the galaxy about the Jedi's, what their role should be versus what their role has been. And that's going to, create button heads. And that's going to be your conflict that's eventually going to lead to maybe Palpatine influencing that a little bit behind the scenes. So ultimately you have the same confrontation between Mace Windu and Darth Sidious and instead of maybe he could still declare an empire, because basically the basis for his conspiracy of the empire wasn't that the separatists were a problem and this war's going on too long. It's that, the Jedi have been pulling strings from the start. They've infiltrated everything. We can't really deal with this. The only way to be safe from them is if we, become an empire stronger together type of thing. So you could still do that.
Yeah.
But I think that would have been more of the direction of the conflict, because it seemed like that was the way Anakin really wanted to go towards the end of episode 2. But because of the war, it just kind of, he got swept up in that. Because as we see even in Clone Wars, like the episode when they go to Zygerria, whatever it's called, where all the slaves are, and he's really having a hard time dealing with this, and Obi-Wan doesn't seem to get it, and it's not until Obi-Wan gets imprisoned and becomes a slave himself that he starts learning to have some empathy with Anakin about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of more of the moralistic crusade that Anakin would have gone on at that point if the Clone Wars don't happen. Like specifically when Obi-Wan says, if we catch Dooku, we can end this war right now. So if they were to have caught him or even killed him in that lightsaber fight at the end of the movie, maybe it goes a little differently, because as we saw in the early seasons of Clone Wars, Dooku was still, trying to be like the elder statesman, so to speak, of the Confederacy, and still pulling the strings. Because when we get to season 3 and saw that there was a Confederate Senate, they didn't seem to be aware of all the atrocities that the separatists were committing on the front lines. They seemed to think that we're all good and all, that kind of thing. So Dooku's still, point being, he's still very valuable. So if he were to have died at that moment, then maybe Obi-Wan was right. Maybe the war doesn't go on to happen, and then Anakin would be able to go off on that moralistic crusade.
Yeah. Or, I mean, there's lots of conflicts and things that could have happened to tie up what's going on during that. If Anakin returns to free the slaves, that gives you a bigger conversation about slavery in the galaxy. Does that, bleed over into the Jedi Order and the fact that they're, taking children in infancy and developing them? Does that lead to the conversation from Solo about droids as slaves? Does that become the new droid war? Is all droids go ahead and try and fight for their own freedom at that point, led by L3?
I think that's the implication of Rey being the one to ultimately inherit the Jedi legacy at the end of the saga, is that she did not get indoctrinated as a child. She chose to be there. It's the power of choice, which is something that Ben Solo did not have, because his parents just kind of shipped him off on his own. And that obviously led to more aggravations. But I would put it to you this way. Like, I took a lighting class in college, and the first half of the semester, they just had us not doing anything hands-on. We're just reading the textbook, reading all these equations and how to set up these lighting setups, and it's just it's bogging everybody down. Whereas once we had to change the professors halfway through the semester, he's like, okay, we're throwing the book out, we're going to do hands-on stuff. And you learn so much more so quickly based on that. Then it's so much better. It's like if you just let the Jedi younglings experience the world for themselves and start indoctrinating, not so much indoctrinating them, but taking people who are morally good, who actually want to be there, who already have their own life experiences, so you don't have to raise them like as little children, because that's why that process in the prequel era Jedi takes so long, because you literally have to do like basic child rearing. You have to make sure to harness their powers so they don't get out of control with it, and teach them all the history of the galaxy and all the negotiation type fighting tactics, all this stuff that they got to learn that wouldn't happen if you just trusted more regular people, which is sort of what Palpatine does in Bad Batch, when he decides that, okay, we're not going to use clones anymore. We're just going to use patriotic members of the Empire to join our ranks,
But then again, ironically, started going back to the Jedi way and kidnapping them as children and rearing them and putting them into...
Right, because that's sort of the clone army is sort of the extreme version of what the Jedi already do. It's like, okay, instead of using our hero, it's not that so much that the Jedi, they're not really kidnapping children. I mean, it's not like if a parent doesn't want to part with their child, they're going to take it in. They're not doing that. But on an extreme level, the clones is like, okay, we're going to grow our own people, our own soldiers who've never been to the Republic. We're just going to feed them all of this. Yeah, when we see in episode 2, when you see all the young Jangos looking at the computers and they got like the headsets on, it's like we're brainwashing them into being our own cannon fodder, so to speak, which is why I really loved the storylines every once in a while where you had a rogue clone saying that they're upset and they're fighting for their brother's freedom type of thing. So it's kind of ironic that the Sith sort of eventually decide, no, we're not going to do this more enslavement type version of soldiers. We're going to use just, regular people, because one, it's a lot. I guess they felt it would be simpler to manage that, because I was having a hard time when I was watching Bad Batch, trying to rationalize why they would get rid of clones who could be so easily controlled and programmed to just, go with regular people. But I guess it's just dealing with not having to deal with having to rear everybody, which is why Rey is evidently a better person to carry on that legacy, because she's not going to go around and guilt trip loving parents, because her whole thing about wanting parents and never having it means she's never going to go guilt trip a parent into giving up a kid. And that's why the Jedi legacy is safer with her. And you can imagine that what would probably the Jedi would go on to be probably what they should have been to begin with, which is monks, moral guidance, heroes, not this kind of political institution.
Well, and apparently outside of the Jedi Order and those in the know, apparently the aristocracy or something like Bail Organa, is the Empire had a whole lot better PR out there in the galaxy, because Han did join. Luke wanted to join the Imperial Navy. They were going off to do that. That was what to do. They were going to be the volunteers. There's another what if right there. What if Luke joins the Imperial Navy, rises through the ranks, and meets Vader that way? And he's like, wow, you are strong.
I remember talking with Spencer about this when we were during one of our post-watch parties for Rogue One, and how I didn't really buy how quickly Jyn Erso goes from being neutral to drinking the Kool-Aid. And he says, well, Luke kind of did the same thing. I said, well, yeah, I guess that's true, but I feel that Luke was more moral to begin with. Like, even if he were to have joined the Imperial Academy, it seemed like he wanted to do that because he just wanted to get the hell off of Tatooine.
Right.
It's not. I don't think it was so much that he believed in the cause, and I think Luke would be moral enough that once he saw the Empire for what it truly was, he probably wouldn't rise through the ranks very far.
Yeah,
I think he would probably like Han. Han joins simply because he needs a get out of jail free card because he's being pursued by these gangsters. But he just kind of, he's a rambunctious guy. Oh, I'm going to be a pilot. It's going to be fun. He used it as a get out of jail free card. Luke wanted to use it as a, get out of jail free card, as opposed to being, evil. Like, even Han says it when they're on Mimban. He's like, it's their planet. We're the hostiles.
Right. Han did not last very long in the Imperial Navy, Army, whatever.
Right.
So, well, it is just about that time. So I think we have muddied the waters a lot. Is that everything in Star Wars could have gone a completely different way. But as always, the Force is going to do what the Force is going to do. The Force is going to be the overarching control and power in the galaxy. So,
all is as the Force wills it.
All is as the Force wills it. That is correct. So if the Force wills it with you, check out our t-shirt store. I've got my brand new virtual Cantina family shirt that just popped right in.
And, check out the Jedi Archive show next weekend.
Jedi Archives, and right there representing
and right there, Unifying Force in another 2 weeks.
Absolutely. And my apologies for the little bit of technical difficulties at the beginning, trying to show us our brand new introduction.
I'll have to catch that up on demand.
I'll let you get that. Yes, if you want to see that very soon, coming to our YouTube channel, and there will be more information in the group about that. All of these episodes will be available on the YouTube, hopefully with our brand new intro right in there, and we will see all of these things. So, final words.
I think that the Force definitely would be pulling those strings to move things in the way it wants to, and that one of the key differentiations between turning out good versus turning out evil was the element of choice. Because if Anakin had ever known that the Jedi would not have allowed him to go back and free his mother, he never would have left.
Right. Having that information is completely different thing. So maybe Qui-Gon living would have made a difference. Maybe it would have made a difference, several differences in the short term. Maybe things would have gone out the way, happened the same way.
Yeah, it might have the eventualities might have been similar or parallel, but the journeys might have been a little more different, a little more maybe circuitous until it gets around to the same endpoint. So with Qui-Gon going on adventures with Obi-Wan and Anakin, which also sounds like a great sitcom. So Disney, if you want to do a animated.
Speaking of great sitcoms, we need one there where Yoda and Grogu that you got there meet on Dagobah. So instead of R2 antagonizing Yoda, it would be the little guy.
Yeah.
There we go. That's another what if for another day. All right, friends, everyone, thanks for watching. See you again in 2 weeks. Please join the Jedi Archives next week for the next episode in the High Republic comics issue. So may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you all. Thank you. See you next time.